75% finished. Iran could have had a working reactor at Bushehr run by Siemens in 1981. It was 75% finished. It was destined to begin at 781. The technology was German. The design was German. The reactor was German. And it should have been completed in 81. Khomeini unilaterally decided to completely end the program. And when they told him about the buildings and when they told him all of these things, he is reported to have said, use the buildings for silos. Put wheat there. If you look at what this regime has done with the nuclear program alone, it is a remarkable breach of their fiduciary responsibility to Iran as a nation. This is a regime that could have decided, should have decided, to finish the program, and Iran would have had a nuclear program, a peaceful nuclear program by 1981. It unilaterally decided not to have it, and then it decided later to relaunch it and do it this time secretly, do it this time covertly, do it this time with German and North Korean and Chinese technologies, with parts bought on the black market. And now, 32 years later, billions of dollars later in direct cost, and I would submit hundreds of billions of dollars lost economic opportunities. This is what the cost of the nuclear program has been for Iran. Yet, we still do not have the capacity to enrich uranium and have a reactor that works. In other words, today, the reactor at Bushehr is deemed to be much more dangerous than the possibility of having it started. They took out the fuel rods that they had put in, something that is very, very serious. The regime claims it's nothing, but that's absolute nonsense. The regime is now, as I said, 32 years later, facing serious, fundamental technological problems, security problems, with something that should have been Iran's 32 years ago. Enriching uranium is neither cutting-edge science, nor is it something that any country should fight for. Iran, an NPT says enriching uranium is an inalienable right of every nation. And this regime has behaved in a way that the international community has saw fit to try to deny that inalienable right. And Iran has insisted on this right at great economic cost and great political cost. One day, if there is a historical reckoning, and I'm sure there will be one day historians, there might one day be a court that tries to judge the behavior of this regime on the nuclear program, and I think they will be found to have been fundamentally misguided in the way they went about it, in both canceling it first, without any national debate about it, without consideration, without doing any kind of analysis on whether it was the right to do this. Ironically, the only thing that is similar about this regime's nuclear program at the Shah is that in both cases, one person decided the fate of it. In 1972, the Shah unilaterally decided that Iran was going to have a nuclear program. They call Abbas Milani to the court, and the Shah tells them, go design a plan. He gives them 2 weeks, and 2 weeks later, Milani comes with a 13-page document, and that becomes the plan for Iran's nuclear program. The largest investment by Iran government outside the oil industry was on the nuclear program. And it was decided virtually by the Shah alone, with no discussion in the parliament, no discussion of economists, whether this is the right thing for Iran to do, whether in fact the price of gas and oil make it economically viable, whether Iran should have a plan, whether it should be in Bushehr, for example, a place that is very much earthquake prone, after what has happened in Japan today, we realize the dangers of putting a reactor at a lethal fault line. And they knew it. The documents show that they knew completely that this was a very lethal fault line. They put $5 million extra to retrofit it for nuclear, for potential damage in case of earthquake. But the decision was made unilaterally. The Shah ordered on the spot for Hoveida to fund this multi-billion-dollar program, and thus began Iran's largest investment outside the whole industry. And in the same unilateral fashion, it was ended. In neither case was there a national debate about it. In neither case, the center of decision-making on budgetary matters, which should have been the parliament, was even consulted about it. And in neither case was it accompanied by a reasonable national debate of experts, by experts, to decide whether this is the right thing to do, and if it is the right thing to do, whether this kind of a technology is the right way to go about it. I just saw a reference to an article by a physicist at Princeton, who says that even if Iran wanted to have a nuclear program, the way they have gone about it is completely illogical. It is like using a technology that is 1940s technology rather than the 1990s technology, 1980s technology when they launched it. Now, they did this, they used this outmoded technology out of necessity. They were now doing it secretly. They were, Siemens was no longer willing to restart the program. They had to go outside. They had to depend on A.Q. Khan, Mr. Khan, who had a design that he had taken from his first employer in Netherlands and brought to Pakistan and was now selling in the international market. And Iran was one of the buyers. And Libya was another one of the buyers. North Korea was the third buyer for this P1 generation technology. So the fact that it is an outmoded technology is partly determined by the circumstances. And the reason they decided to go underground from the beginning and do it covertly is also partly determined by circumstances. They knew what Israel had done to Iraq's nuclear program at Osirak, and they believed that if Iran has a nuclear program, Israel might well do it the same thing. So they decided to, from the beginning, do it covertly, to take it underground. In Natanz, they went 25 feet underground and built a building the size of 3 football fields to allow for enrichment of uranium. Now, when the Shah decides to do this, initially, the U.S. is eager to help. And in fact, there are studies done. One of them is a study done at Stanford that says Iran should have it. It makes economic sense. In fact, Iran should have 20 reactors. That was one of the early studies. But very early on, almost immediately, the U.S. gets intelligence that Iran is making investments that simply do not make sense if Iran wants a peaceful nuclear program. Only a peaceful nuclear program did not make sense for the kinds of purchases Iran was making and the kinds of investments the Shah was making. Billions of dollars in France, in Germany, in South Africa, a company they set up with Israel, a covert, more or less covert company in Iran, Israel, and South Africa. And when the U.S. gets wind of this, of these at least dual-use technologies, meaning kinds of technologies that could easily be turned to military use if the government makes the political decision to turn a peaceful nuclear program into military. The minute they find this, and it's very early on, sometimes late 73, they put the stop on any say on nuclear